My name is Vienna. I'm 27 years old. And until last month, I thought family dinners were just about shared laughter, home-cooked meals, and awkward small talk. But that night, everything changed. It started like any other Thursday evening in our modest Michigan home. The smell of roasted chicken mingled with buttery mashed potatoes, and the soft glow of the kitchen lamp cast a comforting warmth across the old oak table. I had invited my parents over, knowing full well they had their opinions about my life choices, opinions I had spent years quietly ignoring. But this time, I had news that would shock them. I bought a house, my house, and I hadn't told a single soul, not even them. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about family drama, betrayal, and emotional courage. I remember the exact moment I dropped the news. My fork hovered midair, and I felt my heart hammer against my ribs as I tried to appear calm. Mom, Dad, I bought a house. The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating. My mother paused mid-cutting her broccoli, her knife clattering against her plate. My father's fork trembled in his hand, and his jaw clenched. The warmth of our kitchen suddenly felt like a stage for an unseen judgment. "Wait, what do you mean you bought a house?" my mother asked, her voice tighter than I had ever heard it. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I mean exactly what I said. I bought my own place, with my savings, my name on the deed. It's official. My father's eyes narrowed. "Without telling us. Vienna, we raised you. We guided you. How could you raise me or control me?" I interrupted quietly, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. I followed every rule, every piece of advice, and I saved every penny. This is my life, my house. And that was the spark, the proverbial match thrown onto dry tinder, their faces twisted in disbelief and anger, the kind of anger that isn't just emotional, it's territorial, controlling, and deeply personal. I had never seen them like this, not in all the arguments over my career, my college choices, or even my failed relationships. This was different. This cut deeper. We sat there, the air thick with tension. My father's fists clenched around his fork, my mother's lips pressed together, so tightly it seemed like she might injure herself. My younger brother, Ethan, sat silently, eyes darting between us, the unspoken tension making him shrink into his chair. I could feel it. He was caught between loyalty to me and the gravitational pull of our parents' approval. "I don't understand why this matters so much to you." I tried again, softer this time, hoping to ease the storm. "I did this responsibly. I didn't take money from anyone. I wanted my own place. Isn't that what you always taught me, to be independent?" Mom laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that cut through the calm of the evening. "Independent? Oh, Vienna, buying a house without consulting your parents isn't independence. It's betrayal. Betrayal." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Betrayal? I was only living my life, achieving something I had dreamed about for years. How could my own parents see my accomplishment as a personal attack? "You call it betrayal, but I call it taking responsibility for my life," I said firmly. "I worked hard for this. I didn't ask for a handout. I didn't cheat anyone. I just wanted a home of my own." My father leaned forward, his voice low but icy. "You think a house makes you grown up, Vienna? You think you can just ignore the family, the rules, everything we've done for you?" The storm had fully arrived. My parents' words weren't just criticism. They were accusations laced with years of control and unspoken resentment. I realized in that moment that their idea of love was conditional. They only valued obedience, not achievement, only compliance, not independence. Ethan, my younger brother, finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. Vienna, maybe they just feel left out. I mean, it's a big step. Maybe they just. No, Ethan, I interrupted gently but firmly. This isn't about being left out. This is about control. And I refuse to live my life under someone else's expectations anymore. The conversation spiraled, each comment sharper than the last. My mother accused me of hiding money. My father accused me of deceit. The word deceit stung the most. It was as if they were painting me as some criminal mastermind instead of the person they had raised, the same person who had always obeyed, always respected the rules, always sought their approval. At one point, my father slammed his hand against the table, making the cutlery jump and rattle. This isn't about a house, Vienna. It's about respect. It's about family. You can't just go off and make decisions like this. I stared at him, my chest tight, feeling the weight of years of suppressed arguments and invisible chains. I respect you. I do. But respect works both ways. I've given you respect my whole life, but I cannot give up my freedom to satisfy your idea of control. Mom's eyes welled with tears, and her voice cracked. You've changed. You're not the little girl who listened, who loved her family. You've become someone I barely know. And in that moment, I realized she was right. In a way, I had changed. I had grown into my own person, but not in the way she feared. I had grown into someone who could see the difference between love and possession, between guidance and manipulation. We ate the rest of the meal in heavy silence, the clinking of cutlery sounding deafening. Each bite of food felt like a negotiation, each glance a silent battle. Ethan barely touched his plate, watching me with worried eyes, unsure if our family was fracturing forever. After dinner, I excused myself, needing air, needing space to think. Outside, the Michigan wind bit through my jacket, crisp and unrelenting. I walked down the sidewalk, the streetlights flickering above me, and I let myself breathe. My hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from adrenaline, anger, and fear. I knew things had shifted irreversibly. The next morning brought an even heavier weight. On my doorstep was a crisp envelope with the county seal. My stomach sank as I recognized the handwriting. It was formal, official, and terrifyingly cold. A legal notice. My parents were suing me for ownership of the house, claiming it was meant for the family and that I had no right to buy it without their consent. The absurdity hit me first, then the anger, then a strange calm. They weren't just upset. They were trying to take control legally. They had weaponized the law to enforce emotional dominance. And for the first time, I saw clearly the full extent of what I was up against. For hours, I sat at my kitchen table, rereading the papers, my mind racing. How could the people who raised me, who said they loved me, do this? How could the family I had once believed in turn so viciously against me? Every memory flashed. Childhood rules, constant supervision, manipulated guilt trips. All the lessons in obedience suddenly revealed their hidden purpose to keep me under control, to make sure my successes never eclipsed theirs. Ethan came into the kitchen, quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one in front of me, sat across the table, and said softly, "Vienna, I don't know if I can stop them, but I believe you. I've always believed you. Don't let them win." His words were a small comfort, a reminder that not all family ties are poisonous, that even in chaos, loyalty and love can exist. But the reality was brutal. My parents weren't just angry. They were plotting, and the dinner had ignited a storm that wouldn't be contained. I spent that day making phone calls, consulting a lawyer, and mentally preparing for what would be a long, emotionally draining confrontation. I thought about the small victories that had led me here, late nights saving money, choosing a modest home over fancy purchases, quietly building a life independent of their scrutiny. all of it had led to this dinner, the pivot point where my ordinary life collided with extraordinary family betrayal. That night, as I lay in my tiny rented apartment, I replayed every word, every glance, every silenced reaction at the dinner table. I could still hear my mother's brittle laughter, my father's icy threats, Ethan's anxious whispers. The house I bought had already become a symbol not just of independence, but of conflict, courage, and the painful reality of standing up to those you love, even when it hurts. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, this isn't just about a house. This is about me, and I will not back down. So, before we continue with this journey, tell me, where are you watching from? Comment below. And if you want more stories about family drama, emotional courage, and standing up for yourself, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes the battles we fight at home are the ones that define us the most. The envelope still sat on my kitchen counter, its crisp edges almost taunting me. I stared at it for a long while, trying to convince myself that this was some misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with words. But deep down, I knew better. My parents weren't just upset. They were planning to take my house away, to challenge my independence as if it were a crime. I needed answers. And more than anything, I needed to know why. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the steam curl around my face. The bitter aroma seemed to match the heaviness settling in my chest. I sat down at the table and slowly tore open the envelope. Inside were the official papers, the lawsuit carefully typed and notarized, outlining every reason my parents claimed I had no right to the house. As I skimmed the words, a chill crept down my spine. They weren't just angry, they were prepared, meticulous. They had done their homework. Every claim was laced with legal jargon, references to family, agreements, and obligations I didn't even remember signing. I felt a flicker of panic, quickly replaced by determination. I couldn't let this slide. If I wanted to keep my house and my independence, I had to uncover the truth behind their actions. I needed proof, evidence, something tangible that could expose the real motives hidden beneath their anger. And so I started digging. First, I went through every financial document I could find. Old bank statements, tax records, letters from mortgage companies, anything that could show a paper trail. As I spread everything across the table, a pattern started to emerge. Certain payments were listed as family contributions, but they never made sense. Large sums labeled as shared expenses had actually come out of my accounts. The numbers didn't lie. Someone had been manipulating records. I couldn't believe my eyes. My parents weren't just trying to control me emotionally. They had been interfering with my finances, silently siphoning off or redirecting money in ways that made me seem irresponsible on paper. It was subtle, cunning, and deliberate, and it explained the anger, the accusations, the lawsuit. This wasn't about the house itself. It was about power. I needed perspective. So I reached out to my closest friend, Marissa, who had helped me through college and countless life decisions. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, the kind where the hum of espresso machines and soft chatter made the world outside feel distant. I laid everything out for her: the envelope, the papers, the confusing financial discrepancies. Marissa frowned as she sifted through the documents. Vienna, this is a lot, but it's clear. They're trying to gaslight you. They want to make it look like you're reckless, but really, it's them who've been manipulating the numbers all along. Her words hit hard, but also brought clarity. I wasn't imagining this. The betrayal wasn't emotional alone. It was systemic. They had meticulously planned a way to challenge me legally while painting me as irresponsible, all to regain control. I decided to visit the local county office, hoping to access public records about my property and any related claims. The clerk, a cheerful woman named Diane, guided me through the maze of documents. At first, Everything seemed routine, just property records and standard filings. But then I noticed something odd. An amendment to the deed that I hadn't authorized, dated a few weeks before I even closed on the house. My parents' names were on it as co-owners, even though I had signed every piece of paper myself. My hands trembled as I held the official copy. Forgery. That was the word I couldn't shake. They had tried to insert themselves into my ownership without my knowledge. Every part of the lawsuit now made sense. The anger at dinner, the accusations of deceit, even the tense silences, they weren't about a house. They were about control, manipulation, and maintaining dominance over a child they couldn't keep under their thumb anymore. I needed more proof. Over the next several days, I pieced together my parents' financial history. Late-night sessions at my apartment became routine. I cross-referenced bank statements, old receipts, and even correspondence with mortgage agents. Small but revealing inconsistencies emerged. Funds labeled as family contributions that had never actually been applied to joint expenses, letters from my parents attempting to redirect mortgage payments without my consent, even calls to utility companies trying to confirm ownership under their names. Each discovery was like peeling a layer off an onion, and each layer revealed a deeper, more calculated betrayal. They weren't just angry, they were scheming, plotting, meticulously crafting a narrative that cast me as reckless and undeserving while hiding their own manipulations. I decided to confront my brother, Ethan. I needed to know if he had noticed anything or if he had been asked to participate in their schemes. I found him sitting on the couch in his tiny apartment, headphones on, headphones off, a cup of tea steaming beside him. When I explained everything, he grew pale. Vienna, I didn't know. I mean, they asked me some questions about the house, but I thought it was just, I don't know, normal family stuff, he admitted, his voice trembling. I didn't realize they were trying to do this to you. I nodded slowly. It's not your fault, Ethan, but you have to understand they were trying to manipulate everyone, including you. That's how far this goes. They're willing to bend the truth and involve anyone to get what they want. He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. I feel like I should have seen it earlier. Don't, I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. This is on them, not you. The important thing is that we handle it now, together. Ethan nodded, and for the first time since the envelope arrived, I felt a tiny flicker of relief. I wasn't alone in this. Over the next few days, I carefully recorded interactions with my parents, trying to stay calm and professional. Each call and conversation revealed more of their hidden agenda. They subtly tried to convince me to reconsider the house, citing family obligations and emotional appeals. They implied that my independence was selfish and irresponsible, that I had betrayed them by acting without permission. Every word was a trap, a test, a calculated attempt to pressure me into compliance. But the more I listened, the more I noticed the cracks. Inconsistencies in their stories, moments of hesitation, and subtle contradictions exposed the true nature of their claims. I realized that the lawsuit was not about me. It was about them preserving the illusion of control. The house, my independence, even the idea of success threatened their carefully constructed world. One evening, as I combed through old family letters and emails for more clues, I stumbled upon a particularly revealing chain of correspondence. It was between my parents and a financial advisor I hadn't known about. In the letters, they discussed strategies for influencing my decisions, even mentioning the house. We need to remind her of her place in the family structure. One line read, another suggested ways to legally pressure me without raising suspicion. Reading those words, my stomach churned. They weren't just emotionally controlling. They had planned for weeks a method to legally ensnare me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The room felt smaller, the shadows longer. I kept thinking about the envelope, the forged deed, and every subtle manipulation I had overlooked in the past. It felt like peeling back layers of a family I thought I knew, only to discover a version of them I had never imagined. Betrayal wasn't just an emotional sting, it was a strategic weapon. I decided I needed an ally outside the family, someone who could give me professional advice and emotional support. I contacted a lawyer specializing in property disputes and family law. When I met her in her office, the walls lined with books and legal plaques, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. She listened carefully, nodding, occasionally jotting notes. "This isn't unusual," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "Parents sometimes overstep boundaries, but this goes beyond overstepping. They forge documents and are making false claims. You have a strong case, Vienna, but you need to document everything and prepare carefully. They're trying to make it seem like you acted irresponsibly, but the evidence will show the opposite." Her words were reassuring, but they also reinforced the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or family squabbles. It was legal, strategic, and deeply personal. I left her office with a folder of instructions, a list of records to obtain, and a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer a passive target. I was preparing to fight back. Back at home, I created a detailed timeline, noting every financial transaction, letter, and conversation relevant to the house. I cross-referenced dates, amounts, and correspondence. Patterns emerged, tiny manipulations, misleading claims, and subtle psychological pressure that my parents had applied over months, even years. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, painting a picture of a family willing to sacrifice honesty for control. Through all this, I also began to notice subtle signs of weakness in their plans. They had overestimated my compliance, underestimated my persistence, and assumed my silence would protect them. They didn't account for my determination, for my ability to gather evidence and see patterns. And as I realized this, a new feeling began to grow inside me, not just anger, not just betrayal, but empowerment. I called Ethan again that evening. "We need to stay vigilant," I told him. "They're going to try more emotional tricks. But we have the evidence now, and we're prepared. We're not just reacting anymore, we're controlling the narrative." He nodded, a determined glint in his eyes. "We're in this together, Vienna. I've got your back." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. The hidden agenda had been uncovered. The manipulation, the deceit, and the strategy had been revealed in full. And now, armed with evidence, clarity, and support, I could face whatever came next. The kitchen, once a place of dinner and warmth, now felt like a headquarters. Paperwork and evidence surrounded me, and I felt a strange satisfaction in the meticulous organization. This was no longer just about a house. It was about reclaiming my life, exposing the truth, and standing firm against betrayal. Even as I sat there, late into the night, organizing receipts, letters, and statements, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. The house that had seemed like the source of conflict was merely a symbol. The real battle was for control, for recognition, for respect. And in uncovering their hidden agenda, I had begun to reclaim something far more valuable than property: my voice, my power, and my independence. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sharp chill in the Michigan air. I woke early, unable to sleep, my mind running through every document, every piece of evidence I had gathered. My apartment, which had felt like a safe haven during the chaos of the past weeks, now seemed too small, almost suffocating. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy blazer and matching slacks, not to impress anyone, but to appear confident, composed, and credible. Today wasn't about appearances. It was about truth, about finally standing my ground. I could feel my hands trembling slightly as I stepped into my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, The drive to the courthouse felt longer than usual, every turn of the wheel echoing like a countdown to a confrontation I had been preparing for, both mentally and emotionally. As the building came into view, I felt my stomach tighten, a mixture of dread and adrenaline. The courthouse loomed in its gray stone facade, the flag fluttering above like a silent observer to the battle about to unfold inside. Walking into the lobby, I was greeted by the buzz of people shuffling papers, lawyers murmuring legal jargon, and the soft echo of footsteps on polished floors. I checked in at the clerk's desk, handed over my documents, and received a number for the courtroom session. My lawyer, Mrs. Green, a sharp and calm woman in her 50s with an unwavering confidence, gave me a reassuring nod. "Remember, Vienna," she whispered, "this is about facts and evidence, not emotion. Stay calm, speak clearly, and let the truth do the work." We waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, the wooden door looming like a barrier between ordinary life and the intensity that awaited. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my heartbeat, listening to the muffled voices inside. Then I saw them, my parents. My mother sat stiffly, her posture perfect, lips pressed into a thin line. My father leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes scanning the room with a controlled intensity that almost made me flinch. They looked like statues of authority, but beneath the calm exterior, I could feel the storm that simmered just beneath the surface. The courtroom clerk called the case. "Vienna Sanders versus Margaret and Robert Sanders," she announced. The words reverberated in my chest like a drumbeat. My parents' heads lifted slightly as they registered the call, and my mother shot me a glance, cold, calculated, and filled with silent accusation. I met her gaze for a brief second, letting my composure hold before turning to the front of the courtroom. The judge, an older man with gentle but firm eyes, presided over the room. "We are here today to hear the case concerning the property at 245 Maple Street," he began, voice echoing slightly against the high ceilings. "Both parties will have the opportunity to present their claims, submit evidence, and provide testimony. Let's proceed." The tension in the room was palpable. My parents' lawyer, a tall man with a precise manner and clipped speech, opened the proceedings. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that the plaintiff, Vienna Sanders, acted without consent, misrepresented financial agreements, and purchased property that was intended as a family asset," he said, spreading documents on the desk. His tone was professional but sharp, almost predatory. Every word was designed to cast me as reckless, irresponsible, and selfish. I felt a flicker of panic, quickly replaced by focus. I remembered Mrs. Green's words, "Facts, not emotion." I stood, smoothing my blazer, and began to present my evidence. Document after document, I laid out the bank statements, the mortgage papers, the correspondence that proved my independent ownership. I watched my parents carefully, noting every micro-expression, the brief tightening of my father's jaw, the tiny hitch in my mother's breath. Each reaction was a small victory, a subtle acknowledgement that the truth was beginning to pierce their carefully constructed narrative. When the forged deed came up, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Mrs. Green highlighted the dates, signatures, and notary inconsistencies, presenting clear evidence that my parents' names had been inserted without my knowledge. "Your Honor, this document was never authorized by my client," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It is a fraudulent attempt to claim ownership and manipulate legal proceedings. The evidence is clear, and we request the court recognize the true ownership as belonging solely to Ms. Sanders." The silence that followed was almost deafening. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. My parents exchanged a glance, my father's fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair, my mother pressing her lips together as if to keep herself from speaking. For the first time in weeks, I saw cracks in their composure. Then came the witnesses. Ethan stepped forward first, and I could feel my throat tighten. He recounted the conversations he had overheard, subtle attempts by our parents to influence decisions about the house, and moments where he had been asked to provide misleading information. His testimony was quiet, almost hesitant, but filled with authenticity. He didn't embellish, he simply recounted the truth. The courtroom listened, and I saw a few heads nod in acknowledgement. Next, a mortgage agent I had contacted testified about the transaction, confirming every payment and every signed document. He explained clearly that my parents had no involvement in the purchase process. Each statement was a nail in the coffin of my parents' claims. I tried not to watch their faces, but I caught the faint twitch of panic on my father's forehead and the tight squeeze of my mother's hands. Their veneer of control was slipping. Throughout the proceedings, my emotions fluctuated between anxiety and determination. I could feel the weight of every word, every document, every glance. The courtroom became a stage, the drama unfolding with each exchange of evidence and testimony. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Then came the cross-examination. My parents' lawyer attempted to cast doubt on my financial responsibility, suggesting that I had acted impulsively, that I had hidden funds, that I had disregarded family advice. Each accusation hit like a small hammer, but I held my ground, presenting clear, chronological evidence that refuted every claim. Mrs. Green's questioning was precise, leading, exposing the gaps and contradictions in their arguments without resorting to hostility or theatrics. The tension escalated when my mother took the stand. She tried to paint herself as hurt, betrayed, and morally justified in her actions. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying a flicker of uncertainty. I listened carefully, letting her words flow, but inside I felt a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. She was attempting to manipulate perception, to frame herself as a victim, but the evidence I had gathered made her narrative fragile. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart, carefully balancing emotion with fact. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "this isn't just about a house. This is about independence, responsibility, and truth. I have worked for every penny, made every decision thoughtfully, and acted transparently. The documents presented by my parents are false, misleading, and intentionally designed to manipulate the situation. I ask that the court recognize my rightful ownership." The judge listened attentively, occasionally glancing at notes, but keeping his expression neutral. There was no rush, no sign of bias, just the quiet authority of someone who understood the gravity of his decisions. Small twists continued to emerge. An accountant I had contacted submitted statements showing unauthorized attempts by my parents to redirect payments. A neighbor testified about overhearing conversations where my parents tried to assert control over the property before I had even moved in. Each revelation added weight, layering the courtroom with undeniable proof of their hidden agenda. I noticed subtle expressions among the jury members. Their attentive eyes followed every word, every piece of evidence. The more the truth unfolded, the more I realized the depth of my parents' miscalculation. They had assumed fear and obedience would dominate, that I would crumble under the threat of legal action. They hadn't accounted for preparation, persistence, and truth. By the time closing arguments came, I felt a strange sense of calm. Mrs. Green summarized the case with clarity, emphasizing the documented evidence, the inconsistencies in the defendant's claims, and the overarching narrative of control and manipulation. My parents' lawyer tried one last appeal to emotion, to loyalty and family bonds, but the impact was minimal against the solid foundation of facts and testimony. The judge called a brief recess before delivering his decision. I stepped outside into the crisp air, breathing deeply. Ethan was there, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. We didn't speak. Words weren't necessary. The evidence, the effort, the truth, it had all been presented. Whatever happened next, we had fought with integrity. When the court reconvened, the judge's voice was measured, deliberate. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and documents, the court finds that the property at 245 Maple Street is legally owned by the plaintiff, Vienna Sanders. The claims made by the defendants are unsupported by factual documentation and involve fraudulent attempts to alter legal ownership. The plaintiff's rights to the property are fully recognized. Relief flooded through me like a wave. My knees felt weak. My hands shook, but the victory was profound, not just in legal terms, but in personal vindication. My parents' plan had failed. Their hidden agenda, unveiled in painstaking detail, had crumbled under the weight of truth and preparation. My parents' faces were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a faint glimmer of something I couldn't identify, perhaps regret, perhaps realization of the depth of their miscalculation. But I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, feeling the satisfaction of justice served, tempered with the bittersweet weight of familial betrayal. The moment we left the courthouse, the weight of the day hit me in a way I hadn't expected. The legal battle was over, but the emotional turmoil was only beginning. My parents' defeat didn't feel like triumph. It felt like opening a door to a house full of unresolved tensions I had long avoided. Their eyes, once filled with authority, now flickered with something that unsettled me, shame, resentment, or maybe disbelief. I couldn't tell. What I knew was that the silence between us was heavy, pressing, almost tangible. We walked to the parking lot slowly, my steps deliberate, each footfall echoing like a reminder of what had just unfolded. Ethan fell into step beside me, quiet, his hand brushing against mine, occasionally in small, reassuring gestures. My mother's gaze followed us, sharp, calculating, but when our eyes met, I felt nothing, not fear, not anger, just a hollow acknowledgement that things had changed irrevocably. When we reached the car, my father finally spoke, his voice low, almost unsteady. "Vienna, we need to talk," he said. There was a pause, heavy and deliberate, as if weighing each word. "Alone." I nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and resolve. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the city blurring past the windshield. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dashboard, and the quiet hum of the engine made the tension even more pronounced. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Each beat a reminder that this confrontation would be different, more personal, more intimate, and far more revealing than the courtroom. We pulled into the driveway of my parents' old home, a modest brick house I had grown up in. The familiar surroundings should have been comforting, but today, everything felt strange, almost alien. The walls that had once offered security now seemed to hold the ghosts of betrayal, whispers of manipulation that lingered in every corner. My father gestured for me to sit on the porch swing, the wood creaking softly beneath me. He sat across from me, hands clasped tightly, eyes downcast for a moment before meeting mine. "Vienna, I know today was hard," he began, struggling with the words. "I know we've made mistakes. Maybe we lost perspective." I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. "Perspective?" I echoed, my tone calm but edged with disbelief. "You tried to take my house. You manipulated finances, altered documents, and made legal threats. How is that perspective?" He flinched slightly, and for a moment, I saw something vulnerable in him, something I hadn't seen in years. I thought we were protecting you," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how it looked. I didn't mean for it to get this far." My mother, standing slightly behind him, spoke next, her voice soft but sharp, cutting through the tension. "Vienna, we only wanted what was best for you. You've always been so impulsive. We were worried you'd make mistakes we couldn't fix later." Her words stung, not because they were untrue in part, but because they carried the weight of justification, of self-righteousness. Impulsive, I asked, my voice rising slightly. You call building my own home, managing my finances, and working hard to provide for myself impulsive? You call standing up for myself wrong? That's what you call protection. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched and thickened in the air, making every breath feel deliberate. I could see the flicker of realization in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to confront them like this. They had assumed compliance, fear, or at least hesitation. But I had none of those things left. I trusted you, I continued, my voice quieter now but firm. I trusted that my family would support me, not sabotage me. And today, I saw the truth. I saw your plans, your manipulations, and I can't unsee them. My father sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Vienna, it wasn't about control, he said, almost pleading. It was about love. It was about guiding you, keeping you safe from mistakes we made when we were your age. I shook my head, my hands gripping the edge of the swing. Love doesn't forge signatures, manipulate finances, or drag your child into court. What you call love looks a lot like fear and selfishness. The tension shifted then, a subtle but unmistakable change in the atmosphere. Their posture stiffened, and for the first time, I realized that my words were piercing the armor of their carefully maintained narrative. They hadn't expected me to articulate my perspective so clearly, to call out the emotional and practical betrayals they had hidden beneath concern and authority. Ethan, who had followed silently, spoke up, his voice cautious but resolute. Mom, Dad, we can't undo the past, but we need to face the truth. Vienna did everything responsibly. She planned, worked hard, and made independent decisions. You tried to control her, and it hurt her. We can't pretend that didn't happen. The words seemed to hang in the air, a bridge spanning the distance between confrontation and understanding. My parents exchanged a glance, the kind that conveyed unspoken acknowledgement of failure. I noticed my mother's eyes glisten with the beginnings of tears, and my father's jaw tightened in a mixture of regret and stubbornness. For the next hour, we spoke, slowly, deliberately, peeling back layers of emotion, misunderstanding, and past grievances. My parents admitted small but significant truths, times when they had overstepped, moments when fear disguised itself as authority, and subtle ways they had attempted to manipulate family dynamics. Each admission was like a chisel striking stone, slowly revealing the contours of the family I had thought I knew. I spoke to, sharing my own experiences, the weeks of anxiety and investigation, the sleepless nights analyzing documents, the silent fear that I was being undermined in my own life. I allowed myself to express anger, disappointment, and sorrow, but I also allowed a hint of empathy to seep through. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions, not just legally, but emotionally. A small incident broke the tension. Ethan picked up a framed photograph from the porch table, one from our childhood, all of us smiling at a summer picnic. "Remember this day?" he asked softly. "We were happy. We didn't fight about control or ownership. Maybe we can get back to that. Somehow." I looked at the photo, the warmth of memory contrasting sharply with the current storm of emotion. I felt a pang of longing, not for the past itself, but for the simplicity and trust that had been lost. "I hope we can," I admitted, my voice quiet. "But it has to be real this time. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, just honesty." They nodded, and for the first time, there was a sense of fragile truce. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not entirely, but it was acknowledgement. The emotional fallout was real, and it would take time to heal, but for the first time, it felt possible. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle shifts in our interactions. My parents no longer tried to influence decisions subtly. Conversations were cautious, respectful, and for the first time in years, honest. The house, which had once symbolized conflict, now became a neutral ground for rebuilding. I invited them over for coffee, and we talked not about ownership or control, but about memories, shared experiences, and future plans that respected boundaries. Yet, the fallout was not without its challenges. Moments of tension flared unexpectedly. Old habits of control and authority resurfaced in small, almost imperceptible ways. But each time, I caught myself responding with calm assertiveness, reminding them and myself of the new boundaries we had established. The emotional landscape was delicate, like walking on glass, but each interaction strengthened my resolve and reinforced the possibility of genuine reconciliation. One evening, as I sat on my porch reflecting, Ethan joined me with a cup of tea. "You handled today all of this better than I could have imagined," he said quietly. "I know it hurt, but you turned it into something constructive, something that actually changed things." I smiled faintly, looking at the fading sunset. It did hurt, I admitted, but I realized that confrontation isn't about winning or losing. It's about truth, boundaries, and finally taking ownership of your life, not just legally, but emotionally. The days that followed were a slow process of adjustment. Family dinners became tentative but genuine. Conversations that once carried hidden agendas were now open, sometimes awkward, but always real. I learned that emotional fallout wasn't a single event. It was a series of moments, choices, and interactions that gradually shaped a new reality. And through it all, I discovered something unexpected. The confrontation, the heartbreak, and the emotional labor had strengthened my sense of self. I wasn't just defending property. I was reclaiming my identity, asserting my voice, and reshaping the dynamics of relationships that had long been unbalanced. The courtroom had given me legal victory, but the personal confrontation gave me emotional empowerment, a tool far more enduring than any piece of paper or deed. By the end of the week, I could feel a subtle peace settling in. The emotional fallout remained, a quiet hum beneath everyday life, but it no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt like a reminder, a testament to resilience, honesty, and the courage to confront betrayal head-on. I realized that family could hurt, mislead, and manipulate, but it could also learn, grow, and adapt if given the chance, and if the truth was allowed to surface. The days after our personal confrontation were quieter than I had expected, almost eerily so. There were no dramatic gestures, no immediate apologies, no sudden shifts in behavior. Instead, there was a subtle recalibration, a shifting of boundaries, an invisible line drawn between my parents and me. For the first time in years, I felt what it truly meant to claim not only legal ownership, but emotional and personal space. I began spending more time at my own home, walking through rooms that bore my decisions, my effort, my energy. Every corner reflected months of planning and sacrifice. The living room smelled faintly of fresh paint, the furniture carefully chosen for comfort rather than impressiveness. My kitchen, which I had meticulously organized, hummed with quiet potential. The appliances gleamed in the afternoon sun that streamed through the windows. Standing there, alone, I realized I had never truly lived for myself before, not entirely. Distance became my refuge. I didn't cut ties with my parents, but I limited contact. Phone calls became infrequent and deliberate. Visits were brief, orchestrated with precision to maintain calm and emotional safety. It was not spite, but self-preservation. I began to understand that distance wasn't abandonment. It was an essential step for healing. Each day apart was a small reclaiming of autonomy, a reinforcement of boundaries that had been blurred for too long. At first, the silence was unnerving. I was used to their subtle presence in every decision, their opinions interwoven into my life in ways I had hardly noticed. Without that constant influence, I felt adrift, almost guilty. I questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Was I being unfair? But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the courtroom, of the hidden agendas, the manipulation, the gaslighting. That was reality. That was truth. And truth required space to breathe. The healing process unfolded gradually, almost imperceptibly. I started small, tending to the garden outside my home, something I had long neglected due to constant obligations and distractions. Each plant, each flower, became a metaphor for my own growth. I nurtured, pruned, and watered not only the soil but my sense of agency. The vibrant greens and soft blooms mirrored the resurgence of my confidence, reminding me that life, even after betrayal, could flourish. Ethan, who had remained steadfast by my side, encouraged me to explore hobbies and routines that had long been postponed. We started cooking together, experimenting with recipes neither of us had attempted before. The first time we baked a loaf of bread from scratch, the dough sticky under our hands, and the kitchen smelling of yeast and warmth, I realized how much joy simple creation could bring. It was grounding, almost meditative, and it reminded me that ownership wasn't just about property, it was about life itself. One evening, I invited a few friends over to celebrate the small victories: a repaired fence, freshly painted walls, and a garden starting to bloom. The living room echoed with laughter, the scent of roasted vegetables and herbs filling the air. I felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with showing off or proving anything to my parents. This was my space, my rules, my celebration, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for enjoying it. Despite the progress, the emotional fallout lingered in subtle ways. Sometimes late at night, memories of harsh words or dismissive gestures surfaced uninvited. I found myself rehearsing conversations in my mind, imagining ways to respond or forgive. But over time, these memories lost their power. I realized that acknowledging pain without letting it define me was essential. Healing wasn't linear. It was jagged, unpredictable, and deeply personal. Communication with my parents evolved too, in fits and starts. One Sunday afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was hesitant, almost fragile. "Vienna, I wanted to check in. How are you settling in?" I paused, sensing the tentative effort to connect without overstepping. "I'm doing well," I replied evenly, adjusting. "It's quiet but good." There was a long silence, and then she added softly, "I hope someday we can talk openly again." Her words didn't erase the past, but they marked the beginning of acknowledgement. I didn't rush forgiveness. I simply listened, recognizing the effort without surrendering my boundaries. Healing, I realized, didn't require reconciliation in the traditional sense. It required recognition, honesty, and mutual respect. I also began documenting my journey, not for public display, but for myself. Journaling became a nightly ritual, each entry a reflection on choices, emotions, and progress. I wrote about the courtroom, about the confrontation, about small victories in asserting my independence. I explored my feelings candidly: the anger, the betrayal, the lingering sorrow, and gradually the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming my life. Reading back through these entries, I could trace the arc from uncertainty to empowerment, witnessing my own growth with clarity. Another unexpected aspect of this chapter was learning to trust myself in financial and personal decisions. Before the confrontation, I had second-guessed almost every choice, haunted by the specter of parental approval or disapproval. Now, managing bills, negotiating services, and planning home improvements felt like acts of liberation. Even mundane tasks, choosing paint colors, scheduling maintenance, or budgeting for groceries, became affirmations of self-reliance. Each small decision reinforced that ownership was more than legal. It was holistic, encompassing mind, body, and spirit. Ethan remained my anchor through these transitions. Some evenings, we would sit on the porch, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the trees, the air crisp and fragrant with late summer blooms. We shared stories, dreams, and even fears, simple conversations that had been missing in the chaos of family tension. Through these moments, I discovered that emotional ownership wasn't solitary. It could be shared with those who truly supported, without fear of manipulation or judgment. One particular evening stands out. The wind was strong, tugging at the leaves of the trees, rustling the garden I had painstakingly cultivated. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, stopped by with a basket of freshly picked tomatoes. She smiled warmly, commenting on the garden. "You've really made this place your own, Vienna. It feels alive now, like it belongs to someone who cares." Her words struck me profoundly. The recognition wasn't legal or material. It was human. It affirmed that ownership, at its core, was about presence, investment, and the energy we put into life. I started entertaining the idea of hosting small gatherings more regularly. Book clubs, cooking nights, and occasional neighborhood get-togethers became a way to cultivate community around the life I had built. Each event reinforced boundaries while creating connections that were authentic. Unlike the court or the confrontation, these interactions were voluntary, joyful, and nourishing. They reminded me that ownership also meant creating a life that could sustain happiness, friendship, and growth. Healing, however, was never linear. There were days when memories of betrayal surged unexpectedly. A misstep in a conversation with a parent, a subtle tone of condescension on the phone, or even a dream that felt painfully vivid. On those days, I leaned on ritual and routine, writing, gardening, cooking, and long walks with Ethan. These practices became stabilizing anchors, reminders that life continued beyond emotional turbulence. I also began reflecting on lessons learned, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I recognized patterns of control, manipulation, and fear that had influenced not only my parents' behavior, but my own responses. By examining these patterns, I could consciously choose different paths, responding with calm, asserting boundaries, and valuing my autonomy. Emotional ownership, I realized, was inseparable from self-awareness. A breakthrough came one quiet evening. I was sitting on the porch swing, journal open, watching the stars appear one by one. Ethan joined me, handing over a warm cup of tea. I took a deep breath, feeling the full spectrum of the past months, the courtroom, confrontation, tension, and triumph settle into perspective. "I feel free," I admitted softly, not just from them, but from the fear of losing myself in expectations, manipulations, and control. He smiled, nodding. "You fought for more than just a house, Vienna. You fought for your life, your identity, and now it's yours in every sense." The words resonated deeply. Legal ownership had been the beginning, but true ownership, the mastery of my emotions, my choices, my space, was the real victory. It didn't erase the scars, but it gave them context, meaning, and eventually strength. Weeks turned into months, and the emotional distance became a buffer for genuine healing. I remained in contact with my parents, but interactions were measured and respectful. They began to recognize my independence not as defiance, but as a necessity. Over time, small gestures of acknowledgement appeared. A thoughtful message, a shared meal without conflict, even candid discussions about life and decisions. Each interaction, carefully navigated, strengthened the foundation of a relationship that had once been fraught with tension. Meanwhile, my home continued to evolve, mirroring my inner growth. New furniture, minor renovations, and little personal touches transformed it into a sanctuary, a space fully my own. Every corner held intention, from the layout of bookshelves to the placement of photographs and mementos. Ownership had become tangible, emotional, and practical all at once. By the time autumn arrived, I could look back on the journey without the sharp sting of resentment, the courtroom battle, the confrontation, the slow process of emotional distancing. They were chapters that had led to self-discovery, resilience, and empowerment. I had learned that ownership wasn't simply possession of a property or a legal victory. It was the culmination of effort, boundaries, and the courage to reclaim one's life from those who sought to dominate it. As I sit on my porch swing, the soft hum of the evening wind rustling through the trees, I finally feel the quiet strength of ownership, not just of my home, but of my life, my choices, and my emotions. It's strange how something as simple as the walls I painted, the garden I nurtured, and the meals I cooked can feel like markers of victory. Yet they are so much more than that. They are reminders that I survived betrayal, confrontation, and fear. They are proof that I can carve out a life on my own terms without waiting for permission, approval, or validation from anyone. Looking back, the courtroom battle and the arguments with my parents feel like distant storms. What once seemed insurmountable now seems like a series of challenges that force me to grow, to set boundaries, and to trust in my own judgment. I realize that the tension, the tears, the anger, all of it was part of a journey I had to take to fully understand who I am and what I deserve. Healing, I've learned, isn't about forgetting or erasing the pain. It's about standing in that pain and saying, I am more than what happened to me. I am not defined by anyone else's control or manipulation. The distance I put between myself and my parents was never about punishment. It was about survival and clarity. And over time, it has allowed me to interact with them not as a frightened child or a defiant adult, but as someone who knows her worth, who has found her voice, and who refuses to compromise her identity for the sake of appeasing others. I've discovered that real ownership isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can live fully, authentically, and unapologetically. There are still moments when memories of the betrayal surface, shadows of old arguments that threaten to creep in, but I no longer let them dictate my emotions. Instead, I channel that energy into nurturing my home, my relationships, and my own sense of peace. I laugh more freely, speak more boldly, and embrace the life I fought for without guilt. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances notice the change. They see a woman who carries herself with quiet confidence, whose decisions are deliberate, whose presence commands respect without demanding it. And in those moments, I understand that my journey wasn't just about winning a legal battle or proving my independence. It was about reclaiming the power to live honestly and intentionally, even when the world around me tried to dictate otherwise. As the stars appear one by one above the treetops, I take a deep breath and let the serenity of the evening wash over me. I feel gratitude, not for the struggle itself, but for the lessons it brought, the clarity it revealed, and the strength it instilled. I am Vienna, and I am finally free in every sense that matters. My house is mine, yes, but more importantly, my life, my choices, and my heart are mine. I have earned them, and that, above all else, is the true victory.